We've all heard about the Civil War in school, right? It was a very dark time when our country was torn apart by differences that couldn't be resolved without a fight. Now we need to pay attention to some warning signs that could mean we're headed down that road again. We're going to take a look at 5 big ones. But first, I want to cover a bit about the key issues that were significant factors leading up to the Civil War. Most importantly, slavery was undeniably the central issue leading to the Civil War. But other factors also played significant roles in precipitating the conflict. States' rights. The debate over states' rights versus federal authority was a central issue. Southern states argued for states' rights to nullify federal laws that they deemed unconstitutional, especially regarding issues like tariffs and trade policies. Economic differences. Economic disparities between the industrial North and the agrarian South played a significant role. The North's industrialization and economic growth contrasted with the South's reliance on plantation agriculture, leading to tensions over taxation, tariffs, and economic policies that favored one region over the other. Territorial expansion. The question of whether new territories and states admitted to the Union would permit or prohibit slavery intensified sectional tensions. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 attempted to address this issue, but ultimately just fueled more conflict. Cultural and social differences. The North and South had distinct cultural and social identities, with differing attitudes towards issues like religion, education, and social structure. And again, slavery was the primary issue, but it symbolized many of these broader political and economic tension. These differences contributed to a sense of sectionalism and exacerbated tensions between the two regions. Political power. The balance of power between free states and slave states in Congress was a constant source of contention. Southern states feared that the growing influence of free states would threaten their interests, leading to conflicts over representation and legislative policies. So let's take a look at issues today in the U.S. that are eerily similar to the hot buttons that sparked the first Civil War. First, people are getting more divided politically. You've probably noticed how people seem to be arguing about politics all the time nowadays. It's like everyone's taking sides and nobody wants to meet in the middle. Back in the days before the Civil War, it was a lot like this. The North and South couldn't agree on some pretty big issues. The issue of slavery was focused on, but there were many other major policies that divided the two parts of the country. Today, we've got our own hot-button topics like the economy, foreign policy, and our lovely border situation that are splitting us apart. Next, trust in our leaders and institutions is dropping. Think about how you feel when you see news about politicians doing shady stuff or big companies getting away with things. It makes you wonder if you really can still trust the people in charge. While that feeling of not being able to trust the government or the media was a big deal before the Civil War, too. Widespread distrust in the government and media was a significant issue, as people felt betrayed by politicians and doubted the accuracy of news reporting. Sounds familiar, leading to heightened tensions and exacerbating the already deep divisions between the North and South. Political corruption. Instances of political corruption, like the Bleeding Kansas conflict, where pro-slavery and anti-slavery people clashed violently over the issue of whether Kansas would enter the Union as a free or a slave state, highlighted the failure of the government to address contentious issues fairly and impartially. Another one that sounds familiar. Compromised judiciary. The Dred Scott versus Sanford Supreme Court decision in 1857, which declared that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, could not be citizens and had no standing to sue in federal court, was widely viewed as a politically motivated ruling that favored Southern slave interests, undermining confidence in the judiciary's independence and impartiality. A partisan press, shocking. The rise of partisan newspapers that catered to specific political factions further eroded trust in the media, as readers were often presented with biased or sensationalized coverage that reinforced existing political divisions rather than providing objective information, just like today. Manipulation of information. Political leaders and special interest groups frequently manipulated information and disseminated propaganda to advance their agendas, leading to skepticism and cynicism among the public regarding the truth of news reports and government communications. These examples, among others, contributed to a pervasive sense of disillusionment and mistrust in both governmental institutions and the media. Sounds familiar too. Exacerbating tensions and contributing to the growing polarization that ultimately culminated in the outbreak of the Civil War. If any of these historical examples sound familiar, no. It is because we are facing many of the same polarizing actions today, just with different topics of contention. The bottom line is that when we start to feel like our leaders aren't looking out for us all in a fair way, it's a sign of trouble ahead. The gap between rich and poor keeps getting bigger. You've probably noticed how some people seem to have a ton of money while others are struggling just to get by. That divide between rich and poor is getting wider, and it's causing a lot of tension. Back before the Civil War, there were huge gaps in wealth between different parts of the country. And of course, it made people feel frustrated and angry. Today, we're seeing similar anger over inequality, especially with what feels like a constant struggle for the majority of Americans to even put food on their tables. Meanwhile, the elites preach that everyone should be eating bugs and fake meat and purchasing electric vehicles. And this is when over 40% are food insecure on a daily basis. People are joining armed groups. You might have heard about various groups of people who walk around armed, claiming to defend their rights. Well, just like in the days before the Civil War, there were similar groups causing trouble. Nowadays, we're seeing militias and armed factions on both ends of the political spectrum, from far left to far right, cropping up and causing unease. When tensions rise and people get too trigger happy, it can lead to dangerous situations for everyone involved. During the Civil War era, there were paramilitary groups and vigilante organizations on both sides of the ideological divide, from pro-states' rights militias in the South to abolitionist guerrilla bands in the North. These groups operated outside of formal military structures, and they often engaged in violent confrontations, exacerbating tensions and contributing to the breakdown of law and order. Just as in modern times, the proliferation of armed factions during the Civil War era heightened the risk of conflict and destabilized communities, underscoring the parallels between historical precedents and today's trends. Our society feels more divided than ever. Seems like everywhere you look, people are arguing and they're fighting over things. Whether it's race, religion, or politics, there's just a lot of tension in the air. Back before the Civil War, those same kinds of divisions tore our country apart. Everyone had concerns, some legitimate and some not so much, but no one wanted to listen to anything but their own agendas. Today, we need to find ways to come together and listen to each other if that's still possible, or things will just continue to deteriorate. So those are the signs we need to watch out for. By paying attention to these warning signs and hopefully finding ways to bridge our differences, we might avoid another civil war. It's up to all of us to work together and make sure our country stays strong and united.